Hey everybody, today I'm going to look at the 1956 film The Bad Seed, which is about a cute blonde 8-year-old girl who will not hesitate to kill you in order to get what she wants. Alright, The Bad Seed has the look and feel of an episode of a 1950s American sitcom like Leave It to Beaver, except that one of the children has this habit of burning people alive or beating them to death with blunt objects. And if the acting style of this film seems theatrical, there's a good reason for that. The Bad Seed started out as a hit Broadway play which ran for 10 months, and most of the cast of the film was actually lifted straight from the Broadway show. The Broadway play version of The Bad Seed was in turn adapted from the 1954 best-selling novel of the same name by William March. And this novel was widely praised by the critics at the time as a work of suspense and horror. The experience of watching The Bad Seed is unforgettably weird. It's not only the visual contrast between the seemingly benign, wholesome family atmosphere with the dark, twisted subject matter. The music plays a huge role in generating this cognitive dissonance. The score switches from saccharine and innocent to anxiety-inducing and even menacing, according to the mood of the scene. And the overall effect is very creepy. The acting style is noticeably theatrical, as I mentioned before, and it's almost what some people would call campy today, in the way that, for example, the movie Mommy Dearest is. And this is not to say that either one of these films was intended to be funny at all, because they definitely weren't. But it is a bit over the top in places by today's standards, which is a large part of this movie's charm. And indeed, this film gets exponentially more uncomfortable and awkward as it progresses towards its nightmarish climax. The Bad Seed referred to in the title is the character of Rhoda Penmark, played by 10-year-old Patty McCormack. Rhoda is a character that you will not forget. She's the perfect little angel with blonde pigtails who likes to wear dresses and never gets her shoes dirty. She has impeccable manners and an adult-level social savvy. All the grown-ups in the film fawn over her. She certainly has an unusual charisma about her that is very striking. We can immediately sense that something's not quite right in this household, though, judging by the behavior of Rhoda's mother, played by Nancy Kelly. Rhoda's mother seems to be ill at ease, and her unease really ramps up when the father goes away on an extended work trip, leaving the mother to deal with Rhoda by herself. It soon becomes apparent that behind Rhoda's veneer of sweetness is a manipulative quality. She knows exactly what behavior that the adults around her want, and she expertly feeds it to them in order to get what she wants. And it works astonishingly well. The adults want to cater to Rhoda's selfishness, and none of the adults seem to see through Rhoda's fake charm, except for her mother, which may explain why her mother appears to be suffering but unable or unwilling to explain it to anyone. The Bad Seed is a particularly fascinating film because it combines two very interesting ideas, and those are the idea of psychopathy and the idea of the blank slate. Okay, Rhoda is a psychopath. Her behavior is dominated by a ruthless, Machiavellian drive to get what she wants, and she utterly lacks empathy for other people. The interesting thing about Rhoda is that she's at kind of an intermediate stage of psychopathic skill. She's only a little kid, so she's remarkably charming and manipulative. But she hasn't quite perfected that adult way of mimicking authentic human emotion in the way that adult psychopaths often can. Now, Rhoda, despite her harmless appearance, is an extreme example of a violent psychopath. But psychopathy, like pretty much everything else in life, exists along a spectrum, and all of us are somewhere along that spectrum. One interesting aspect of psychopathy, according to the current conception of it, is that violence is not a necessary component of it. In other words, there are many, many psychopaths walking around among us that, by all superficial appearances, are normal, functional human beings, and they aren't hiding piles of bodies in the basement. However, once you get some life experience behind you and begin to identify certain patterns of behavior in other people, you begin to notice that there are quite a few people out there, and some of them might be close to you, who seem to lack a sense of ethics or morality and behave more like insects. They just seem to be missing modules, so to speak. They lack a certain humanity, but they are very good at covering this up so that most people won't notice it, at least at first. One component of psychopathy, which is not emphasized as much, is the psychopath's inability to accept responsibility for his or her own behavior. Which is very interesting. It turns out that psychopaths aren't usually people who manipulate or steamroll other people in a transparent, straightforward way. They have a need to justify their behavior, usually by blaming somebody else. And we clearly see this with the character Rhoda in the film. She doesn't kill people just for the hell of it. Her victims forced her to by not giving her what she wanted. It was their fault, not hers. This unwillingness or inability to ever admit that you were wrong is a trait that seems to be shared by worthless and terrible people of all stripes, not just psychopaths. And it seems to comprise the basic difference between people who grow, develop, and improve as adults and people who spend their whole lives navigating the world with the same set of sucky and childish behaviors that they had as teenagers. Leaving aside the topic of psychopathy, the central idea in this film, and of the novel and play before it, is this idea of the blank slate, or tabula rasa. And there are various forms of this idea that have been around at least since the time of the ancient Greeks. And it's basically the nurture side of the nature versus nurture debate. And it's the notion that our thoughts, behaviors, and personalities are not innate, but are determined primarily by our environment. At the time this film was made, the blank slate idea was definitely the dominant and fashionable view in psychology and in the humanities in general, partly because of Freud's influence over the field, and partly because of the simple fact that the field of genetics was really in its infancy at that time. For example, the famous double helix, the physical structure of human DNA, was only discovered a couple of years before this film was made. And the idea that some people were just irredeemably damaged right out of the womb was considered ridiculous by most of the so-called experts at the time, though perhaps not so much by lay people, who sometimes have instincts that turn out to be closer to the truth than the specialists do. It would be easy to dismiss the blank slate controversy presented in this film as outdated, but it isn't at all. Though today it is more generally accepted that most human traits can be explained by a combination of genetics and the environment, the blank slate idea lives on in other areas and appears to be more a matter of ideology than it is a scientific idea. Take, for example, the hysteria and intellectual dishonesty that is unleashed anytime the issue of the heritability of intelligence or IQ comes up. Arguments about this almost immediately end up with one side resorting to name-calling and personal abuse. There is a certain type of person who is deeply uncomfortable with the idea that not all people are born with the same deck of cards, and these people have chosen to adopt an egalitarian moral sense that has become part of their identity. And as we know, when ideas become part of our identities, it is often difficult to think rationally about them. It's interesting to ask ourselves why psychopaths like Rhoda persist in the world. But if we look at the question from the standpoint of human evolution, it's not hard to imagine why the type of person who will stop at nothing to meet his or her own needs and who is adept at disguising aggression behind a mask of superficial charm might have a reproductive advantage over the rest of us, especially given that most of us only learn to recognize these people for what they are long after we've already mated with them, and thus ensured that their genes will survive another generation. And the cycle starts again. Okay, that's it for The Bad Seed. You definitely have to check this film out. If you haven't seen it or if it's been a while, it's worth watching just for the pure spectacle, and maybe it will even prompt you to undercover a psychopath in your life. I'm Rod Richards. Thank you for watching. See you next time.